Boom. Welcome to 3D for Beginners, Twitch streaming and imagery trends week on Adobe Live. If you missed any of the previous streams, then please you can view the replays on Behance or YouTube. Check out illustrators, designers, and composers use everything Adobe has to offer, including Photoshop, Illustrator, and my favorite, Adobe Fresco. Plus, don't miss out on our curated selection of past Illustrator Daily Creative Challenges every day this week at 11:30 Pacific. Right before this stream, tune in and challenge yourself with a new prompt each day. Hello, I am DTM, aka Delta Tango Mike, and today we have the amazingly talented Kyle Jamison, who will create a Peter Tarka-inspired scene using simple 3D techniques in the Adobe Substance Suite. Welcome, Kyle. Tell us more about what you will show us today.
Hey, Daniel. Nice to meet you. And yeah, so today I'm basically going to go through kind of a 3D workflow and kind of going through making a list, kind of making a mission of what I'm going to try to set up. And I really think that the process should be broken down in terms of, you know, starting with assets, starting with an inspiration, because I think that with these types of projects, if you don't kind of have like a good foundation, I think that it can kind of, you know, take too long, not really get anywhere. And that's generally how I've matured with some of these projects. This is my Behance. And yeah, how I generally started too was getting into 3D. I got into After Effects after college during an internship. And I saw a coworker using Cinema 4D. Okay. And I was fascinated with it. And I've always kind of had an inkling in it to it. I was into it in high school a little bit as well. And I think that type of like procedural workflow, that's kind of becoming very prominent in the realm where kind of the art directing can be changed fast if you give, get feedback. It's kind of at a click of the button per se, if you can change the assets that you're working with instead of kind of starting from ground zero. So if you want me to kind of, I can get into the brief that I have. That's generally how I start my projects.
Awesome. Yes, please do. And you mentioned that the way you started is always a little chaotic in the beginning, and that's where I am. So I'm here to learn. Share with us.
Yeah. So, yeah, these past months, I've actually gotten a little bit into, if you've ever heard of like Virgil Abloh, he started a brand called Off-White. He worked at like Louis Vuitton. He was into architecture. And I've also been looking at this guy called Peter Tarka, right. who's a very prominent 3D designer. He's worked with a lot of great companies. And he kind of has this like simplistic shape language that I think is great to start as a beginner because it doesn't require too much, you know, like crazy modeling skills. And I think like with 3D, it can kind of be a little intimidating. But when you kind of use and you start to kind of understand the ecosystem in the Substance Suite, you can not only like work in different softwares, but you can make changes in different areas and they all kind of, I guess, speak to one another. You can easily like export things to one another as well. Yeah, so these are an example of Virgil's work as well, where he's a designer, and I think he's really fascinating too because he studied architecture, and you can see like these kind of wireframe chairs and this like I'm gonna actually try to make something like this like rock table, which is perfect to do in a Substance Designer, which was intimidating for me for a bit, and then I'm also pretty into like Japan, so I thought that would be a cool kind of subject color scheme idea to focus on with this. And I think kind of having those three different inspirations for me can kind of produce something that's different and doesn't maybe look exactly like the thing that you're inspired by. And in terms of composition too, I think that these are a great starting point. You know, you kind of have some like radial array looking shapes. You have some like discs. You have things that have like holes in it. It almost kind of looks like a story. Like I noticed with this actually alludes to like, to me at least, it alludes to like a human figure. Like this is the body and then that like this is the head
Right,
sitting
right.
in the chair, which I thought was kind of fascinating to do something with shapes and angles like that. And just to go a little more over, like I try to have some quotes with this. Less is more, God is in the details, which was from a teacher of Virgil Abloh's, and just kind of some quotes, some inspiration, some shading ideas, and kind of I think a really good way to start with some of this stuff too is to kind of limit yourself in terms of like a shape language,
Okay.
which is what I'm going to kind of stick with. So yeah, I can jump into sampler here, or excuse me, stager, where basically this is where you kind of take all of your 3D assets and then start, creating your composition, right? So generally speaking, I want to start with a plane, and you simply just click a plane. Let's say, I think another really elementary thing when you get into 3D software is, right, like you're like, oh, how do I rotate? Well, you can hold Alt, and then let's say you get like way over here, right, but you actually want to focus on your plane. You press F, which is awesome. It's actually used a lot in any type of Substance software, right? So I'm going to open Substance 3D Designer, which has the textures. Basically, you can do procedural stuff in here, right? So this I prepped, and I think I'm going to actually do for these tables, right? These like wireframe tables, I've actually made a chair asset. And so you can, go into here and then go to import 3D model, go to your assets, which I've already modeled. And let's say, hey, I want to import this Muji chair, which is a brand. And it kind of looks like a chair. It's kind of interesting. I think the form of it's interesting. And then I've also modeled a wireframe table, because like I said, I wanted to make this table, and I'm also going to try to add this rock texture right here. And so in Designer, it's a little overwhelming at first. And so to make a new graph, you click this button, you go to metallic roughness. All of these settings are pretty good to go. And then you click new. And I think if you're getting into 3D, you kind of have to understand these base things, right? So you have like a diffuse map here. You have a normal map, which is kind of faking depth and making things kind of have extrusions, right? So like if you have a basketball, for example, it has kind of it has a texture to it, right? It's not just a complete flat surface, because you want to have your hand grip onto it. That is what a normal map imitates to some degree, and it's used a ton in video games. If you're trying to do like environment art, or if you're trying to be a material artist, this is what they're constantly in all the time with these graphs, right? So I'll go back into this just base graph just to kind of explain here a little more. This roughness value too is going to kind of represent like whether you're working with a material that's a mirror, right? Like if it's super reflective, or is it more like a rock where there's not much of a reflection involved? Is your surface metallic? Somewhat self-explanatory, right? Like, are you working with aluminum? Then yeah, it's going to be super metallic. Are you working with a rock? Well, the rock is not very metallic. Right. Ambient occlusion is another map that kind of fakes like the areas between like your sleeves, right? Like there's a shadow involved, and it kind of recreates that shadow. And then finally the height map, which actually I can demonstrate, which this is a perfect example with this rock texture, right? So you can go here and go to scene, and then you can change any types of shapes, right? So I can have a rounded cylinder. And going back to this F functionality, if I'm like way out here and I want to focus on it, I can just press F.
F functionality is like a Control 0 on Photoshop,
yeah,
right?
Actually, just right, just like in Photoshop. Yep.
Yeah.
And so let's say I want to add some height to this. I'm going to go to materials, go to default, and then go to metallic roughness and do tessellation and displacement. And actually, I'm going to start a timer here real quick, just so I'm kind of, have some accountability and I don't get a little too lost.
Right.
And so now that I've clicked that, right, this goes back to exactly the maps that I'm talking about. It has some of my normal map information here. And this graph really just starts with some basic shapes. But in terms of this height map, right, it seems really flat. But then if I adjust this height map, you can now see that I have some more like rock
protrusions.
Yeah, extrusions.
Yes.
It looks like if you were per se like standing here, you would maybe be looking at like cliffs or something like that. So I guess for this demonstration, I'll really crank up this height value. And, I think it looks a little too absurd right here. So I think maybe, and that's a constant thing with 3D. I think it's like kind of deciding when to continue, when to not, and kind of dial certain things in. But let's start with, for example, these Virgil materials, right? He kind of has like an interesting gradient, like it goes from orange and then it goes to pink. And I think that that's a pretty interesting base material to just start out in Designer, because like this looks intimidating, right? Like this rock texture, it's kind of complicated, but it can be broken down just like Photoshop. Like you're working in layers. You need to kind of think about, hey, like I want to start with a base shape and then I want to variate that shape with certain nodes. But when I go into Designer here, I need to, for a gradient, I want to add a gradient map, which is just like Photoshop, for example. And then, I want to add a shape, and this shape is just going to be a base shape. And I plug this base shape into this gradient map. And this base shape you can adjust. You can do it square, you can do a disc. But for the purposes of making this gradient overlay, I'm just going to do just a flat. I just want a flat plane. I don't want anything fancy because, for example, in this rock, I actually have an extruding, a much more like nuanced shape that's creating this like rock texture. But in terms of this gradient, I want to go here, and then maybe I want to, have this graph editor, and I want to go to my Photoshop and say, hey, these colors that I've already chose, I want to sample it with the eyedropper tool, copy the, actually, let's just do the Japanese flag colors, which is red and white. And so I'm going to go back to Designer here, and then go to the gradient, double click this, and then you can see here that I actually have the hex code. And once I think I actually forgot to copy
it. Yep, I noticed.
Which
but I know what you're doing. I know why you're doing that, because I do that all the time. That's right.
Hold on one second. All right, it's BC002D. Okay, so BC002D. And then I'm going to X out of here. And then this gradient should populate. Let's just adjust this, go to the base color. And then, so for example, I might come back to this because I need to figure out why that's not populating. Maybe it's because that's plugged into there. Possibly. But so this shape, right, like it's just a blend layer. It's basically, if you've used Photoshop, you should have some type of thoughts of like, okay, I want to add some noise to this base shape. Okay, there you go. So I have this type of noise effect, and I adjust this red, and I'm like, hey, I want to clamp this. Maybe I want more red. And then so I'm basically just mixing this. I'm mixing a white shape with this Perlin noise, and then I have these options, these blend modes. So basically, once you click these nodes, you have all of your parameters here. So hey, like maybe for some reason I don't like, and this kind of goes back into this procedural workflow where it's like, hey, I want a different seed value, which is what that's called, where basically you can generate different patterns with your noise that you have here. And let's say I want to scale the noise down. clicking this Perlin noise. Let's go to 3.
Oh.
And then let's maybe add some disorder to it, which kind of just distorts the noise, if I'm not mistaken. But then with these blend modes, I can subtract it. I can do an add sub functionality. I can do overlay. And these are situational. It gets a little more nuanced with that rock texture, as I mentioned. But for now, I'm going to stick with this. And I'm going to say, hey, you know, this seems good. Like this base color is good. Let's jump back into Stager. And in order to export this, I'm going to actually just do a quick save here and say gradients. And so, like I said, with these apps, you can kind of jump around, right? So I click this SBS, go to here, and then right here, I can send it to different types of Substance softwares.
Mhm.
So Sampler actually is another great area, I think, to start, because it's like Designer, but it already has a lot of it done for you. You can also do like some photographs. Like you could take a picture of rocks in the real world, and then in Sampler you can project the you can basically make a 3D texture out of it. So
Nice.
I'm gonna go to here and export to Sampler, and if that doesn't work at this moment, I can just kind of say, hey, like let's go back to Designer, and then let's try to export it to Stager. And there you go, actually. So it exported to Stager. And you can now see that if I just adjust this really quick, you can kind of see it on here. Maybe I'll just put it on this chair just to demonstrate it.
Nice.
So, you know,
wow.
It's just kind of like this, you have to kind of be a little fearless in terms of, hey, like I can learn these apps and then jump around different apps. But let's start kind of, I'll get back into Designer. I kind of want to block my scene out. So you can just see there that I just added a camera. And just with like Designer, right? Like I said, if you click these nodes, you have all of your parameters right here. So in Stager, I can go here and then be like, hey, I want to have my output size, which is perfect. I want to have a 1920 by 1080 image by the end of this. Maybe I want to adjust the focal length of my camera. I kind of like 70 millimeters. You can then get a little more nuanced with some depth of field, which I think I'm going to adjust at the end of this. But I want to have, just like in the reference, I want to have, he kind of has like an isometric shot here. Like you can see that he almost has like an environment, like a cube. So like he has these walls, he has this plane, and then, you know, he has this other wall here. So I think working with that type of idea is interesting. So I'm going to jump out of my camera here by just selecting, and this is just like a Photoshop, like all of your layers, all of your objects are all here. I can group them. So I can say, hey, like maybe I want my architectural, like industrial design stuff here. So let's just call this like, let's just call it furniture. And then let's actually, I also like to think of my 3D scenes too, of like, where would you be? Like, are you in a house? Are you like outside? Are you looking, like, is there a tree around? Because that could also then maybe influence the light, for example. Like this environment is where you kind of add a thing called an HDRI, which has like light information. So I think I'm going to start doing the environment just to kind of build it out real quick. So let's say I want to have this type of wall. You can see it's a little massive. So I'm going to actually scale it down by like 0.1. Actually, you can clamp it. So I want to do 0.1. Press F, right? See right there, actually, I was like all the way here and I'm like, wait, where did all my stuff go? Just press F. And then you can actually see too, when you, let's say like I was moving it and I actually want it to be at the edge. I want it to be exactly at the edge. When you move in Stager, it'll actually highlight, it'll prompt you to be like, hey, you've reached the edge. Because in 3D, that's a huge part of it, right? Like you have vertices, you have a point here, you have an edge, and then you have a face. Those are some kind of key concepts in whatever 3D app you're really using. And so then when you also use the assets here in Stager, there's like jugs, there's food, but for now I'm going to kind of stick with some of these assets that I have right here. And so when you use these assets from Adobe, like I also have some Adobe Stock stuff. So let's kind of like make like a playground. Like I want to have all my assets here for me, so that I can, and actually when you do these Adobe Stocks, it's all kind of packaged for you, right? Like it's already put in a group.
Okay.
And I think for now, I'm going to import a little more. So I'm going to go File, and then I'm going to import. And I think you can actually import oh, no, you cannot. You can. So I'm just going to actually just import a few of these, right? So I'm going to do File.
Nice.
I'm going to import.
Cool. And those are from Adobe Stock. You downloaded those for free?
Yes, correct.
Nice.
There also are some textures and shaders that I also downloaded that I'm going to also be introducing here. I also want to have it seem like, maybe this is kind of alluding to like a kitchen or like a living room, these images. So I also want to have some assets like these bowls. So I'm going to turn this off, and I have kind of these Japanese bowls, for example, and to go actually into the a few more of these assets, right? So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to my assets. I'm going to go to my designer files, and these are actually downloaded from Stock as well. So Japanese porcelain, which is perfect for this, right? So I literally just say,
drag and drop.
I want porcelain, right? I want porcelain on my, bowls, right? Like they wouldn't really be made out of metallic. They wouldn't be made out of fabric. That's what they're generally made out of. So, right. So I'm going to go here, and let's say, I don't know, I kind of like the deeper one, because I think that it would be cool to maybe like put some of the shapes that I'm going to be using, because with these like Peter Tarka ones, right? Like it's kind of playing with physics. It's like, like in the real world, this would fall over. Like it would be weird for it to kind of be balanced like this. Right. So actually in Stager 2, you can do stuff like that. And so to kind of stick with some of these ideas, I'm going to actually just reduce the height of this. And this is simple, right? Like I can just adjust values. I can type them in. Let's say I want to have it at like 5. Maybe I want the radius to be lower. And another thing I'm kind of having kind of qualms with is the this bowl is way too big. It's not to scale. So maybe let's say a bowl is like, I think that's another thing too to think about with 3D, right? Like this bowl is gonna be smaller than my chair, for example, right? So it actually seems like it's a pretty good value, and maybe I just need to actually crank up the size of my environment, and then maybe I need to adjust my size of my other assets. So this chair, for example, right? You have your size right here, and it doesn't. You would never sit on a chair that's 2.5 centimeters. Right. That's preposterous. So let's crank it up. Let's say like 10. Let's even go bigger.
There you go.
And actually, because I have this grouped, you can see that it's scaling up both of my assets here. So, all right, this looks a little better. I think the scales still could maybe be adjusted. I'm gonna just really go to like 50. I'm gonna crank this back up to here, and let's do like 250. Let's actually just do 2 meters, because 2 meters is 200 centimeters or 200 centimeters, right?
Okay.
And then I have this here. I have this here. Maybe I want to make my wall a little bigger. So I want to maybe make the wall height larger. I want to make the wall width wider. So let's do like 1,000 centimeters. And I think this is actually a cool tool because this hole is a little representative of the or the circle in here could be representative of the flag. Like the Japanese flag is pretty much just you know,
that's right,
has like a circle here. So I sort of like the idea of adding like Easter eggs. If you've ever played video games and you know like there's Easter eggs that they have in the game for you to be like, oh, like this is alluding to or referencing something.
Yeah, little surprises.
Yeah, like something for you to chew on. I think is a very interesting idea. But you know, let's keep like adding to this playground real quick, because I want to like have the pieces to the puzzle that I'm trying to put together, if that makes sense. Let's import a few more assets. So I'm going to go to the Japanese chopsticks. Let's just drag this over. I just want to have kind of everything laid out for me here. I think I have one more model. I think I already imported those. I imported those. I think I've imported everything at this point. And then my other thing that I was trying to do here, right? The shape language that I was speaking about at the beginning. I want to have spheres. I want to have triangles. And now maybe you're thinking that, hey, these basic shapes, I don't actually see a triangle. Well, that's where you would start with a cylinder. And in here, you can adjust that. So right now, this is measured by, there's actually 48 points that are making this cylinder here, or rather this circle. And a triangle has 3 points. So I just click 3.
What?
And then you generate a triangle. And then I'm gonna, let's say I'm gonna adjust this height. I think another interesting thing, let's go for that like Peter Tarka look here, where you have like a chair and you have this furniture balancing things. And then you kind of have all these like shapes stacked upon each other, and it's kind of like just like an interesting form experiment, I guess, would be like another way to think about it. So, you know, let's go with like this circle here. And actually, maybe I want a little more of a complicated circle, and that's where these assets are gonna come in a little bit. So I'm gonna go to these structures, these Adobe assets that I've used. And I kind of like, this is also another maybe thought too with these folded shapes, is that like with Japan, there's origami.
That's what I was thinking about when I saw them.
These, yeah, exactly. So I think that these shapes, I'm not going to use them throughout the whole thing, but I kind of want to have them because you can also see he has some kind of basic shapes, but then he also has some like, you know, like extruded, these look like they're extruded faces, or for example, this has some cuts into it. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to choose, I actually like, and because this is circular, I like this look. And so I'm going to place this here and it's saying, hey, you've hit the plane, which I want to have it here. And I don't know, let's say I want to have, I think this triangle could be a cool little play on this like balancing act. So I think this is also an Illustrator too, where if you, let's say like I'm adjusting this angle and I'm like, oh, this is not as precise as I'd like. You just hold shift and it'll actually move by 15 degrees, which is super nice. So another thing that I've also been playing with a little bit recently is just literally angles and like the perception of that. And there's an angle that I really have been liking to play around with, which is called the golden, I think it's the golden angle. It's noticeable in like patterns of flowers and stuff like that. And you can kind of see right there that like we're kind of getting that illusion of like, hey, this physically looks kind of Um, well, let me go a little into this. You can actually, another cool functionality into here, you can make this thing called a collision object, which in 3D, like, let's say you had like a ball crashing in, like a ball crashing into a building, and you want the building to look like it's getting destroyed. You want a collision type of effect. And this is what I'm going to do here, right? So I'm going to say, hey, when this triangle hits this shape, this folded, let's just call this a folded sphere, I want this to collide into it. I want it to, you know, like be affected by it. And let's just go here. I might have to come back to that, but let's just adjust this a little more. Let's push this down. There you go. So see see how like it looks like it's
falling over,
attracted to it, basically.
Yeah. Nice.
But that's perfect, right? Like this is perfect for that illusion of like, hey, like in real life, this would never. You would maybe see it falling, or maybe you would take a picture of it at this point, which I think is the cool thing with Peter's compositions, is that he's, you know, making these layouts right here. So I'm going to go back into my camera. I'm going to say, hey, like, let's just decide where I want my camera. And right now it's super zoomed in. And let's go for that like orthographic view. So I'm going to go to my transform here. And my position here, it's, you know, I can kind of adjust that, but let's just do this adjustment. And then let's make sure that my rotation is 135 degrees. Oh, maybe that was not what I wanted there. Maybe I want this actually to be 180 degrees. Oh. And then let's go to 0 here. Actually, let's flip that around. Sorry about that.
That's all right. This is a fun ride right now.
Yeah,
that's what you do. You experiment. You try to see what you like, what comes up, and
precisely.
And you start remembering these numbers. Yes.
Yeah. So let's just go to like, I think I was like happy with that negative 135. Whoops. Let's just see. That's kind of, I think actually, my bad. I forgot about this actually. See, you're kind of going crazy. You're like, oh my gosh, like this camera. But if you actually just, I forgot that you can do this with the camera selected. So I want to say, and actually this is a great practice. There's, in 3D, you can use things like null objects, or this thing called an empty. So like, let's say I want my camera to focus. I want my camera really to be focused on this little corner right here. Actually, I'm going to duplicate this. I think you can do, yep. Control D is how you duplicate in here. And I just want to establish my wall. And I want to go here, and then I want to bring it right here. And maybe that wasn't perfect. I just want to make sure that I have this. I might switch. I want to have like 2 different walls. Like I want to have these walls have 2 different textures, just for like a little more visual interest. So actually, let's just choose some type of wall asset. Let's maybe just do this like square. Although actually, I think that square idea kind of goes away from the idea of the you know, I'm trying to stick with circles, spheres, and triangles. Right. So I think for now, I'm just gonna do a simple. And by the way, all this stuff's here. Like I have my assets here. I have my shaders here. Right. So like all of these shaders, right? Like you just drag it from here. And you're like, oh, cool. Like I have these interesting things. And I think for now, I'm gonna drag some on, because visually speaking, like when it's grayscale like this, it's not, you know, it's maybe not the most like engaging thing in the world. So I think I'm gonna add like just a little bit of visual interest. Let's go to these Adobe Stock things. I want to have, let's do like this. I think that will be cool. Although actually, let's maybe put that on the floor, because I think that the UV is like, it's a term for how like textures are projected onto 3D objects.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to make sure that those are all fine and dandy, because you might get into a little bit of a scruffle there if you don't, and it might not project the right way. So let me just actually, I duplicated the plane. I think I'm going to do the Japanese type of ceiling right here. And then let's bring this up. And I want to actually make sure that it's perfect. I want to say -100, 100, and 0. That's all good. And this is called sorry if I've kind of skipped over this. This is basically where you change and these are huge, like in animation in 3D, the scale and then the rotation. So I'm saying, hey, I want to adjust the scale. And actually right now I have the scale constrained. Like I just want to adjust this axis. I just want this axis to be lowered. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to hold shift. Oh, actually shift I think does what it does in Illustrator actually, where it constrains it.
Nice.
So I'm just saying, hey, like I want this scale, which actually seems to be the Z axis here. Oh, no, sorry. It's the X axis. I want to have this be like, let's say like a wall, like in a building, if you're in like an office building, might be about like 3 or 4 meters high. So let's just go with 4. Bring that down, and okay, it seems like 40 is where it's about flush. So okay, so now I kind of have that look where I have I'm just kind of adjusting it to make sure that it's all fine. Oh, and I guess that's kind of very important for any type of thing that you're doing, is to make sure you save it. So like
that's
stream,
right.
I would have been absolutely devastating if this got because I've already imported all my models. I have a few like setups in here, so I just saved. It's Control S, just like any other type of software.
Right.
The wall.
Let's go ahead. Let me interrupt you for 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead.
To give everyone a chance to know, if you're just joining us now, Kyle is taking us through the process of building your scene, arranging your geometry, applying textures, and setting up your camera across some 3D apps. And earlier there was a discussion in the chat about how the brain goes into hibernation or the brain shuts down whenever I see the nodes and graph in these programs. Thank you, Becca, for that. And I felt the same way.
So yeah, like, I mean, you can go from like, this to me is like 0, right? Like all you've done here, right? And this is like the procedural way. You have to work with like nodes. And I think if you think a little bit about, like, if you're into Photoshop, like this really is like Photoshop here. Like, okay, I have this generative noise. You press tab to go into these types of effects, maps, as you will. Like, let's say, for example, like if you're looking at a mirror in real life, you probably have some like splotches on it and stuff. Like in Designer, you already have these. You have a grunge map. But I do understand that, like I think you have to get a little used to, you know, hey, like these wires and stuff. And like, I mean, especially once you start looking at like a graph that's like this, it's a little intimidating. But I think let's kind of stick with this gradient map. There's a ton of good tutorials. Like, for example, this fabric, which I hope to not butcher her name. Her name is Louise Meline. She's French, and I think she's a developer, or she's a beast at Designer. And she has a tutorial on this, which I think is a great tutorial. And like, you know, this is so cool, right? Like this is like a if you get super close, it looks like it's chainmail. It's like it's a fabric. And really, yeah, like if you're just starting out, it does look like a lot of nodes, but I think it's a super cool thing to like jump into it. I think it's about a 45-minute tutorial. It's called, like, if you look up Fabric Substance Designer, I think you'll be able to find it. But in her instance, right, like all you're doing is you're taking this map, which I found online. It's a Japanese pattern. You have to make sure it's tileable. And really, I'm feeding it into different nodes here.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm transforming it, right? Like I'm saying, hey, I want it to be smaller. I want to rotate this image. It is kind of like a Photoshop mindset in that sense. I'm using levels. Like you literally use that in Photoshop. I'm just adjusting the color values. I'm blurring it. Like I'm saying, hey, like this is a little too sharp. I want to kind of blur it. In here too, I'm basically, you can see where I'm blending this, right? Like I'm taking this anisotropic noise and then doing this subtraction onto, so I'm being like, hey, like I don't want my shader to look just like this map. I want it to have a little more character. And actually, this is kind of with that procedural thing. Once you have this setup, I now have like a different pattern. So I can just say, hey, I want this type of pattern. I want this here. I can get, like, I don't want to go too deep into this. The tutorial, I think, explains it a lot better. But this type of like fabric weave pattern, she sets up super nicely. And you can see how at the end of the day, I'm basically making some weave patterns here. It's called a weft. This graph here, this graph here. I have the textile pattern, which all I really did was just say, hey, like, I want to blur some things. I want to do some grayscale conversion because I don't want this color. And then at the end of the day, this whole complicated thing, it's all kind of coming down to bringing all of these together and then maybe adding something like, you know, I want to add some like imperfections. This kind of goes back to this, like, if I'm working with this, right? I want like I think one of the quotes that I have is like, God is in the details or something like that, right? Like, and really, what is it? Yep, God is in the details, less is more. And so really like this fits perfectly with this, where I'm going to here and I'm saying, hey, like this moisture noise, I want this grayscaled. I'm adding this fractal sum base. All of these are just nodes. Like, you know, they're kind of, think of it maybe as like an Adobe Stock, where it's like, in Photoshop, if you finish like a poster and you want to add some like imperfections to it, it's all here.
Yeah,
Then
Justin Roy said the same thing. He said, you're just layering effects and maskings to get the effect you're looking for, just like the appearance panel in Illustrator. So yes, thank you, Justin Roy, for that.
And so like basically, and actually Sampler is perfect for this, right? Like Sampler actually is even easier than this, where I can just be like, you have all of that stuff in here actually. But like you have filters, right? So like you have these types of filters, like where you finish this, you're like, hey, I have this perfect chainmail looking texture, but in the real world, like maybe you've like been in a battle, or maybe it's been there for like 100 years. It's gonna have dust on it. It's gonna have like, it's gonna have some wear.
Distress, kind of like adding a distress to a graphic so that it has like, that real world.
It's like adding displacement or something to your finished poster. Like you don't want it to be, you obviously don't want it to look bad, but you want it to have some like depth and interest to it. So actually, I think a thing that I was thinking about recently with this Peter Tarka thing, right? Like he has this cloud, he has this cloud looking thing here, and it's really just a plane. It looks, but the camera is actually set up perfectly to where it looks like it's an illusion. Like it looks like it's cut out of the box. And actually in my project, I want to go back to let's just close out of
let's give Voodoo Val and Becca big ups. Thank you for the link. They did post a link in the chat.
Of the tutorial.
Yes,
yeah,
I don't know how to pronounce that either.
To me, that tutorial is gold, with like kind of seeing like, hey, you know, what can this do? Like, what is the super complicated stuff that it's capable of? I think that it's a great way to kind of get acquainted with it. Yes, it might be a little intimidating, but it's like a great texture. And I think another perfect thing to do with these designer tutorials is to like make it kind of your own. Like, I added this moisture to it. I added a different, I think she uses like a New England type of like chainmail looking thing, but here I'm going for like a Japan type of style. So I really wanted it to be my own, maybe adjust some of the values. And so when I go here, I'm gonna actually go to this fabric and say, hey, I want this fabric to go to Stager. So I'm gonna go to this exporter right here and double click. You have to actually be selected on here. I always kind of forget that. So then I've exported it to Stager and it should populate here. Yep, there you go. So actually, when you have it selected, so I had this plane selected, which is exactly what I want, right? Like I want a plane and I want the fabric texture to be projected onto this plane. And once you have it like set up in Stager, you can actually see here, and then I can adjust things, right? So I'm like, hey, I want this plane to be larger. I want it to be a little wider here. But I think for now, like you can do things, as I was mentioning before, you can adjust things in here, like the height map, which I might have to fiddle around with here, but you can maybe see some like intricacies with this height level. And I think actually because I don't have a height map like plugged into the material right now, but I think I do. There you go. Actually, you can see when I adjust this normal map, it gives an illusion of like depth because this is not actually going to be like a flat texture, if that makes any sense. So I'm gonna drag this down, and I want to actually yet again make sure that I'm hitting the bottom of the plane, or really the plane is just another word for the ground,
the floor. Yeah, I see it.
Right.
Yeah,
so I'm gonna
cool.
actually, it seems like this plane, and you kind of need to think about some numbers, right? So this plane is 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters, so it's a fifth of a meter, but that's not too important here. Like but I guess what I'm saying is basically I need to make sure that the plane is at the halfway point. This is about 10 centimeters, and I want to make sure that the Y value, it's hitting the plane right here, right? Like if I go down, it's cutting through here. I actually just want it to be flush,
right?
And I want to keep it at 10 centimeters. And yeah, so all right, so I've hit some things. I want to explain one other rabbit hole in Designer real quick that I've been getting a little bit into, and it's somewhat new. You can do some really cool things like you can do like procedural modeling in it, which I think is super fascinating. So something that is really cool in 3D is doing arrays. So I have this, I'm like the primitive 3D node. This is actually a super simple like setup. If you think nodes are like super crazy, all I did was add a new substance model graph, press tab, add a primitive 3D, and you have options, right? So let's continue with the sphere. I want a sphere, and then I want to have, maybe I want to have like a cube of multiple spheres. In here I have the array. So I want to have, let's do, I don't know, let's do 32 by 32 by 32. I have 32 duplications, but you're maybe asking yourself like, why don't I see that now? Well, it's because that I don't have this adjusted.
Oh.
And you can actually see here now that I have 32, and that actually seems, let's actually just do an 8x8 grid. Let's do 8x8, and then let's do a separation of 100, which I think is about a meter here, if I'm not mistaken. And then you can see I have this.
Wow. I like that. Okay.
Yeah. So then, and then the cool thing, right? Like I'm saying in Stager, I'm importing and like putting textures and stuff onto this, right? Like it's not, I'm not modeling stuff. I'm not making the textures in here. I need Designer here.
Okay. So Designer and Stager, you have them both together working at the same time, back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah, you can't, you gotta be open to like embracing all of them. And the cool thing too, I think like once you start embracing them, you can kind of be like, oh, well, I don't now need to learn like a new shortcut. I can just you know, I learned this in Stager. Well, now I can bring it to Designer. It kind of speaks like the same language.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna actually, let's just say, you know, let's save this. Let's do like sphere, you know, like frame thing. I don't really have a good name for it right now, but then we're gonna go to here, and then I am going to double click it, and okay, there you go. Okay, you have to right click here, and I'm saying, hey, like I'm done with this. I think it looks cool. Maybe it's a little too much. Let's just do like a 4x4. And that's the cool thing too, right? Like if the art director, let's say I finally get this in here, which I'm about to do, they're like, for some reason there's too many spheres. Like I don't like it. It's too crazy. I don't have to like make it from scratch. All I literally do is just say, hey, like just click these different values, and then you'll have a different outcome. So let's save it. And then let's do send to Stager. And it's too big. That, and, you know, you have to. So actually, and that makes sense though, because I had 4x4x4. So I have that on the X, Y, and Z axis. And then I have an offset of 100, 100, 100. And so when I send it to Stager, it's actually, it's the biggest object that I have in the scene right now, which is no good. So I'm going to do 10 by 10 by 10. And there you go.
That's right? It.
So
another thing I noticed is that the measurements, you have to keep in mind the measurements. You're using centimeters and meters and so on. And I like using inches, but you also want like the chair to be, if it's going to be one size, then everything has to be relative to what a normal chair size would be, right? So you keep changing those numbers to not just look good on screen, but to even make sense in 3D space.
Absolutely, right. So like, you know, I could import this sofa, for example, which I'm not going to use in my scene, but like this is a great thing to use. Like a lot of people in 3D apps will import like a human, because, and let's say like on average people are like 5 to 6 feet. You know, like it's a great reference to be like, oh, hey, like this is way too big. Like this makes no sense.
Right.
So in hindsight, I should have actually imported this a little earlier. So I'm like, okay, well, you know, it looks like these things are a little small for my liking. So I'm going to actually adjust the floor.
Does the computer run slower, or does the program struggle if some of these elements are bigger? Or real big in size?
No, yeah, like yes and no. So that's actually dependent on the amount of vertices that you have, right? Like, so this object right here, this wireframe thing. Whoops, hold on, kind of lost my floor there for a second. This wireframe, or like these folded ones, they have a lot more faces. I don't know if you can actually see the value, but like this plane, for example, is just one face. It's super easy for your computer to calculate. But like this sofa, I mean, it could have like, let's say it has like 10,000 faces.
Okay.
So yeah, like the size, like the scale of it doesn't really matter, but the amount of faces. And like I said too, when you get into 3D, you kind of have to like understand that, like the faces, the edges, and the points. Like on a plane, the points, the edges, and the face are super big, or just super important to kind of comprehend. I think that will kind of give you a great like starting point.
Gotcha.
All right, so yeah, so I kind of demonstrated here, like with Stager, or excuse me, with Designer, you can do some procedural modeling. It goes a lot more in depth. There's some crazy stuff that you can do in it, but I'm just gonna stick with, you know, I'm like, okay, that's cool. I've kind of made some little more complicated geometry, right? Like he has some simple ones like that, but then he has some interesting geometry here. And with Designer, I could just bang that out real quick, right? Like I have this sphere, and then I have these multiple spheres, and it's kind of like an interesting looking pattern. So let's rotate it. And actually another super important thing to comprehend with 3D is the origin point. And you can see right now actually that the origin point, which is indicated by
That corner.
this, is at the bottom left, I guess is what I would
That's
say.
bottom
But
back.
you can, I want it at the center because right now I want to manipulate the rotation. I want to have it maybe at like a, you can see that Peter plays with some like different types of rotations and like different kind of like basic 3D ideas, but when you rotate them at a 45-degree angle, and then I'm gonna go back to that golden angle, which I like. I think that's the name of it, 137.5 right here. And so let's kind of arrange it a little more. Let's like bring it down, and then let's kind of orient it. And oops. It's gotta kind of be a little more precise. Like I just want it to go down. I want it to be like I want it to be as if it's like sitting on the chair.
Do you ever zoom in and use the arrow keys? Is that something you can do? Arrow keys?
The arrow keys, I don't think so. It's not like I think you can do that in like Unreal Engine, but it's not like a game engine. So no, the arrow keys, I personally think that you should use this when you're first starting. You should absolutely use this gizmo. Like this gizmo has it all here for you. But you should hold like shift, like I want to scale it. I want to scale it equally here. Like I don't want to just like grab it and not do that.
Gotcha.
So, I kind of like this scale here. And really in his composition, the plane is pretty much the biggest item, other than I would say the backdrop. But let's like not consider the backdrop as like an item. Maybe like it is, but so let's go to 40. Let's do -40 to orient it, -40, and then let's just manually adjust this camera here. So you can actually see I have the camera selected. And I want to go into camera view, and let's go into the camera view. Okay, so let's adjust it. Let's do this. Let's do 135, and then let's do 180. And I think the angle that I'm looking at. Okay, there you go. Right. So I now have it oriented in that like almost orthographic view is what I'm kind of going for. Like I want it to focus. Actually, let's just do that. Let's press F. That's actually, I think that's probably gonna be my way to go. I get a little janky if I don't do the F function with the camera, right? Like I was going backwards, I was going side to side. But okay, so like for example, like let's say I want to focus on this triangle, like press F. There you go. But I don't want to do that. I want to focus. This plane is like well, for one, I love the texture. And two, it's like kind of the center. It's the focal point, maybe you could say. Like it's the centerpiece. So let's go back to Stager. And we've got a little more time. So I think I've kind of covered like the camera setup. I think I've kind of covered like how I go with the brief. And I think I want to add a little more. Like the composition is just not there. Right now it's just kind of like it's kind of word salad. It's like a playground right now. So I think I want to have I want to get out of my camera view. Well, actually, in terms of composition, I want to say in the camera, like I'm saying, hey, like this. Oh, to me, it's like this is the shot. Like I want to set up this shot, and I know that I want this to be pushed back because it looks like in Peter's work, it's almost hugging the edge. Like the edge is right here. Like the corner of the box is about here. The plane
and those circle shapes on the right side, the kind of edge on the clouds.
Yeah, and actually it's like a play of alignment.
There's the edge right there.
And like it also alludes to me, it alludes to like a puzzle. Like, oh, does this is like a lamp, but it kind of makes me think that maybe this circle like fits into here or something. Like it gives you that kind of like concept. So I'm going to align that. And for now, I'm gonna just, I might bring these fancy walls back in when I have the time, but I just want to block out my composition here. I don't want to spend too much time with like fiddling around with some dimensions of the walls
Okay.
right now. Like I just want to have I want to have like a cube, but a broken cube, because when we get further down the line, I'm actually going to add some lighting, and with the lighting, I'm going to want it to come into my scene. And let's make sure everything is pretty organized, right? So I want this plane to be with this plane. Let's name things. Let's call this
Right.
ground.
There you go.
Let's
Name
call
your
this
layers.
yeah, but I think overall, I think there's an interesting fine line of being organized. Like I could label all of this myself, but like, in terms of like time management, I think being organized is good to some extent. Like there's a middle ground of like spending too much time organizing, right? Like
Right.
you really want to be focusing on the important things, which organization is important. But I think that there's a cutoff of like how important it is. Okay, so all right, that's what I think he has. I think he has, like, you can see too, like the light is coming in here. Like you can see the specular. That's actually another important value of 3D is these. Some of these look like they're plastic, but then some of these look like they're actually maybe like reflective plastic, like they have maybe like a coating on it. And the cool thing is then you can detect where the light's coming from. So it looks like the light's coming from here. And to me, that makes me think his light, which actually, I'm not going to get into lighting too soon, but I'm just going to add it for purposes of a demonstration. Like the light looks like it's right here, right? Like this is my light object, and I want the rays of light to maybe in my composition. I'm gonna try to have some more interesting lighting, but to me it looks like he has a light that's hitting from that angle.
That's your key light right there.
Yeah.
Voodoo Val, big ups to Voodoo Val. She says, I love how often you refer to your reference, your work very digitally to keep your eye on the ball.
Yeah. And I think when you're starting out too, like think in that, like, come back to it. Like I try to think of like someone like on my shoulder, kind of like repeating these concepts that I have. Like,
right.
So like going back to it, like thinking to myself, okay, like, do I have circles? Do I have triangles? Do I have cylinders? Yeah, I have furniture.
I'll get you. That's
okay.
Good.
What do I not have? I actually don't have the Japanese text, which...
And don't forget to save. Carol, thank you, Carol says, and save. Name your layers and save.
I think it has been probably...
Yes, it has been. I've seen it popping up. Awesome.
So
there you go.
Let's actually go into Illustrator, because I want to show off a 3D thing that it can do. And let's just make like I want to actually I don't know why it does it by points. I want a 1024 by 1024 plane. And then let's actually Google like how do you say Illustrator is being a little weird there. Let's Google triangle in Japanese. Okay, that is the translation. Okay, and then I'm gonna go to my text, and I'm gonna go to text here, and I know you're an Illustrator guru. Okay, there you go. All right, that's where it is, and I think I have Japanese activated, and I want to make sure I am. This I believe is Chinese, and then I know. Fun fact, I've actually started taking like a Korean course.
Nice.
So I do know some of the Korean, which one is Korean or not, but I think the Japanese one is, I believe that this one I'm almost certain is. So I'm gonna choose this one. And I click it, and then I say, hey, like, I have this Japanese text, and if it's not actually Japanese, but I think this is, right? Like, it wouldn't, I don't think I would copy and paste correctly if I didn't. But the cool thing is like I said with Designer, like, I'm making my models and I'm making my textures in here. I'm not doing it in Stager. Stager's for the lighting, for the composition. But in Illustrator, but let's say I want to actually have a 3D text. You do have this text here, but I want 3D Japanese text, and you can do that here. So, and I think for some reason it had it open by default here, but all you have to do is click, once you have your text that you like, you're like, all right, this is here, it says triangle. And then I go to the window, 3D and materials, and then all I do here is do extrusion. And then you can see it is 3D here now. And now I select my layers, which my layers...
Clever is providing some assistance in the chat. I can't even try to pronounce that. I will say it wrong, but is that does look like Korean. He added Korean to the chat. And Voodooval says, I started a Korean course. I haven't finished it though. The Duolingo bird has been threatening me
to finish.
That looks good.
Okay, well, I'll go back to that. I think off the stream, I'll confirm if it is
the exact word.
But for demonstration purposes, no matter what languages, like what I'm kind of demonstrating here is you can make some interesting 3D assets actually in Illustrator, and then export selection, have it selected, go here, be like, okay, like Adobe, the stream, blah, 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 models, Illustrator exports.
Yeah, pay attention to where you're putting it.
Yeah, and then
organize your files.
Triangle, Japanese. The path does not exist. That's fine. Hold on.
While you're working on that, hello everyone. Warm welcome. If you're tuning in from YouTube or Behance, remember to subscribe and like the video. Leave a comment, question, or suggestion so that we know you are there. Adobe Live replays are available when we're offline, and we have replays on both channels on YouTube and Behance. So please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the creative goodness. Back to Kyle.
So, okay. There you go. So I have asset 3 here, and then I'm going to go to Stager, and then I'm going to get it out of my camera, and then I'm going to go to File, Import, 3D Model, go to my desktop, which is where I saved it, go to OBJ, go to Asset, generate UVs, and then there you go. All right,
wow.
Cool.
And I noticed that you did not even bother with colors while you were in Illustrator, because you can always add all these extras in dimension and substance.
In Stager,
Stager.
Yeah, right. So, I'm not gonna, and honestly, I am rusty in Illustrator, so I don't
touch 3D anyway. I don't touch 3D.
I don't want to like deal with adding the gradients and stuff in here. I know that it's fully capable of, but that's why I'm in here. And then I'm like, okay, let's go back to like the Adobe Stock stuff that I have, and let's say I want like. I want this to be wood. And then there you go. You have the wood.
Wow, look at that.
Because like,
yes,
it just looks kind of intricate. It has good UVs, which, like I said, is kind of like how you project these textures onto something that's more complicated. Like putting a texture on a plane is a lot simpler than putting it on this text, right? Because this text has so many different faces, etc., etc. Another thing that I have not really gone over is in this object area, you can do a thing called displacement. And in real life, like, wood is not generally, and actually I'm just gonna save this just so like things are generally, let's like, okay, let's call this like font playground, just so I'm making sure like everything's gonna be running pretty smooth. Because once, like, if let's say I was rendering out the final image and you have a bunch of apps open, it's gonna be slower, but I digress. So let's like add more displacement. You can see now that like wood in real life is not gonna just be, unless you're like literally building a house or something. Yeah, maybe the wood's gonna be like completely flat and like perfect,
real smooth.
But in real life, like if you were in Japan or something, like you were looking at trees, like you were looking at like an old castle or something, like stuff's gonna be, it's gonna have some wear and tear. It's gonna have displacement. Like it's gonna look, it's not gonna be perfect. It's not gonna look bad. Like I'm not going to make it like, if I really crank it up, maybe that's not like the greatest example to demonstrate it, but you can see now that like it has some like interesting kind of crevices and shadows, and without it,
that wood grain is popping off.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Like, and it'll pick up more shadow information. And maybe I'll like keep this in my composition, but I think it's kind of cool because, well, one, I don't speak Japanese, and I like the idea of like you as the user, or excuse me, as the viewer looking at this, and it kind of goes back to that like Easter egg mindset to me, to myself. It's like, maybe I want them to kind of think like, oh, what does that mean? Like maybe they like look something up because of the artwork or something, like maybe they're interested. And I actually do have that in some of my pieces on my Behance of like I have like a gold project, for example, and I tried like learning myself more about like what gold, like how is it made, et cetera, et cetera. So like, to me, if I kind of sneak this in here in the composition, which I'm still going to adjust, it would be kind of neat to have. So we're at all right, we're at 4:15. So I'm thinking, let's just do some adjustments to this composition. I want to have it, it's, you know, I have this aligned. I personally like, in this composition, it looks like he has the plane about, well, it's actually really dark in this one, but it looks like, for example, in this one, it cuts right at the edge. I do like that. So I'm gonna actually copy that myself. I'm gonna put it here. And it looks like if I do negative 140 centimeters, and then let's do negative 90. Actually, because I pushed it back, I see. So let's just go to negative 80, and then let's just adjust it. I just saved it real quick, and let's push this over.
There you go. I like it.
Okay, it seems like negative 136 is where it's gonna like meet the edge right there. And then I want the table, just going back to like that Virgil, and honestly, like Virgil, he was like a great, just like generalist. Like he does 3D, he does architecture, he does like fashion. And so it's interesting that his composition, he has the table kind of in these like settings, he has them as like kind of the centerpiece.
Even at an angle, it's still in the center right there.
Right.
In between those
two
chairs.
So I actually, because that this asset is a triangle too, I actually want it to like, I want it to like point towards you. And actually, because I have this group, because I have that grouped in the furniture area, I need to make sure that I'm actually selecting this triangle. And orthographic views are perfect for manipulating like at certain angles, and I believe orthographic views are really prevalent to like 90-degree angles, and half of 90 degrees is 45 degrees. So it's a perfect angle actually to go to this camera. And now it might be a little hard to see because of the, let's just like, let's keep that gradient that I initially made. Let's maybe make this table a little bigger. Oh, actually, hold on. Oh, the rotation. I believe I have it clamped. Oh no, that was actually the group that I was adjusting there.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really important thing to like, I think, consider with this, is that like you need to make sure that these groups, like you're selecting the correct asset. Otherwise, I think when you're starting out, it can get a little like, oh, what just happened? Like, what did I just click? Type of like mentality. And so right now I'm holding shift, and I'm gonna try to think in terms of like I want to have this be like I don't know if you can do, I would love to know, or if this could be a feature to add into this, if you can actually add a camera overlay. I would love to know if you could do that, right? Like I want to have a 2x3 grid. Like I want the lines here and here and then across. So I'm going to kind of guesstimate and say that this table is going to be about, let's just scale it to like 32. Oh, not that.
Wow.
32. All right, let's just keep it at 32. And at this point, I think I'm just gonna scale and rotate and use the assets. So like, for example, I've imported these chopsticks. I like the idea of the chopsticks, and maybe this base thing can be put here. And actually, just like this Virgil piece, he has the, like, in this instance, I've used the wireframe as the base of my table, but I actually want the tabletop. So for the tabletop, I think I'm gonna do I think we're actually gonna use at the very beginning, I think this was the very first asset I had, was the cylinder. And I'm going to take the cylinder and I'm gonna, let's just kind of go, let's go above. And I would love to know too, like in certain other 3D apps, you can like change, you can say like, hey, I want a side view, I want a top view, but for now I'm just gonna do it here. I don't know if there is like a shortcut. Like in some apps, you can use your numpad and press like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that will adjust your view.
I did a 3D session with Jazz, the artist, and I do remember she had like a couple different views you could look at. One which was the camera, so you can always refer to what the camera see, the composition for the camera, and then the other view rotating around to move things around. There, and I can't remember if there was more than one view at the same time, or she had a click on to change where she was a second ago. And
like there in the other one, right, you can have like you can have like two views at once. Like let's say you wanted just to look at the top, but then you also wanted to look through the camera. But I'd have to look at the documentation for that.
That would be very helpful. Big ups to I'm sorry, Kyle, hold on one second. Big ups to Clever, Elizabeth, and Becca. Don't want to forget about you. You guys are keeping the chat alive. Thank you very much. And Becca does, let me see. No, Elizabeth is asking, what kind of specs do you need so that the 3D programs don't absolutely fry your device? So
yeah,
I mean, you had a Windows 11 right there going on.
Yeah, and like I think I have like a 1650, like I have it right here actually. Like my system information, I believe I have 32 gigs of RAM.
Nice.
That, like, there's different instances. I have a good processor, but yeah, like you don't need like a 3090. Like if you're doing really intense stuff like fluid simulations, like let's say you're trying to make like an ocean, or like there's a project that I'm working on where like you're having like chocolate poured down onto like I forgot the name of that, like European chocolate that has nuts in it, that like extrude out, and it comes in that like gold wrapper. But anyways, if you're doing like smoke simulations, fluid simulations, stuff like that, yeah, like you should start considering it. And if you're doing like animation, like in After Effects and stuff, like, yeah, you do kind of want to beef your computer because it's going to save you time. But I don't think it's, by no means is it necessary, especially when you're starting. Like there's I just don't think it's necessary. Like you should absolutely explore and like experiment with it. And like when I first started in 3D, like I had this like, man, I had this like 2015 like MacBook, and
Mm-hmm.
some of the renders like you could just do if it takes a while during the day, like you could just do overnight.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So I think
Start where you are. Start with what
yeah,
you got right now.
it's definitely a marketing
Uh-huh.
like Nvidia, like they want you to buy like the 3090s, but is it
Right.
necessary to start like right
Mm-hmm.
then? Like no, I think you can just start on like a laptop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just built, my friend helped me build this computer like in November of last year. And
Nice.
so like it's not, yeah, it's and I've been doing it for like probably 8 years or so. So it's like, you know, I
Yeah.
don't fall under that like, oh my gosh, like I need it now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Take your time.
so
Start where you are and build from there. Eventually, you'll understand the shortcomings of the devices
yeah.
that you have, so that you know what to get and what will work for you. Not necessarily what Kyle has,
Yeah,
unless you
it's
want to build it yourself.
by no means is it
Yeah.
necessary. Yeah, I
Right.
totally agree with that. So,
Gotcha.
all right, so I'm just gonna like, so I'm actually gonna flip it around, right? And actually, one of Virgil's, I highly recommend watching some of his like talks. They're like, if you're into design and stuff, and like maybe you feel like you're stuck in like a bubble, or like you maybe want to branch out, like he's the epitome of doing that. And one of his sayings is like, I think he was talking about like a Nike shoe that he was working on, and he says he tries to change things like 3%.
Hmm.
So like he was told to like redesign this Nike shoe, like he redesigned it 3%. So
Mm-hmm.
that mentality here, I think I'm gonna do that with this table, right? So instead of the table being, I actually want the base to be a wireframe,
Mm-hmm.
but then actually instead of this being glass,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I actually want it to be like granite, or for instance, I want to show off the rock texture that I made.
Right.
And I'm just going to quickly go over this rock texture. Like this rock texture really comes down to just a basic shape, which is going to be my rock. Like this is my rock shape.
Mm-hmm.
You use these things, these other nodes called tile, like
Mm-hmm.
tile random. This is simply just an iteration of the shape. So I just kind of have a little more detail.
Mm-hmm.
And then you use, I think that this is one of the coolest nodes in Designer, is a non-uniform directional warp grayscale. And it's kind of like a fancy term for like, just kind of like warping shapes and like distorting them. And when you can like distort them by an angle, you can lower the intensity here, you can change the modes. That node is a little nuanced, and I do think you should follow some tutorials. I highly recommend to Daniel Theiger and Javier Perez. Those are the goats. Those are the like best people, I think, to dive into like rocks, or like just really grasping the power of Designer.
This reminds me of the when back in the day there was a big trend for bevel and I just forgot the other word. Not extrude. Any case, there was those effects in Photoshop that you would sit there and play around and get those angles, get those shades
Yeah, like
on 2D objects. Mm-hmm.
yeah, like this,
Mm-hmm.
because you have the view too. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
literally seeing your
Mm-hmm.
2D shape, and then you see the 3D one here. But like you do have bevel. You have a bevel
Mm-hmm.
node here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
and that's what that reminds me. So it is through little by little you can now understand that and start using it to your advantage.
yeah,
That's awesome.
and so I mean,
A level
overall,
and
I'm
emboss. Yeah.
basically yeah, I'm basically starting with the shape,
Mm-hmm.
making some variation, adding some interesting layering effects, which actually this layering effect is literally from a Daniel Theiger video, where he kind of like he adds layers to the rock.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But really, it's like I'm just blending this in. I'm adding a little more variation. Like I'm like, okay, Maybe I want to adjust the level. I want to do a histogram range, which like changes your grayscale values. And then I'm just blending that all in. I'm doing the exact same thing actually that I did right here with the fabric. I'm adding, I don't want this, this is rock too, right? Like with fabric, yeah, it's a little more perfect. Like it's a little more pretty, but like with a rock, I want it to be weathered. I want it to look like it's gone through rain, storms, like.
And less symmetric, not symmetry. You want it to have.
Yeah, like I want to have cracks, which you can easily do in Substance Sampler. Like you can literally just choose. Actually, let me just demonstrate that, because I do think that like Sampler is a great starting point to kind of just think about like shapes and like adding things, right? So like, let's say, let's go to like this car paint. But let's say I want the car paint to have like cracks, and I want it to look a little like, this looks too perfect. Like maybe this looks like a brand new car. And realistically, like cars, actually this is a great example. Like you can add corrosion, which really these nodes here are actually just really maybe complicated. Like I could, for example, take this setup here and then just make this a substance sampler, like I guess input would be the word that I'm looking for here.
I see. Yeah.
And so like I can add cracks. Maybe this will be actually, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So like instead of you could do this in Designer, but it takes a lot more kind of like nuanced and experience. And that's why Sampler, I feel like, is a really cool way to just be like, okay, I just want to add some like cool effects really quickly. You can throw in dirt, as I mentioned. Like maybe I think this dirt is way too
dirty.
Yeah,
it's very dirty.
And you literally have,
oh, there you go.
As with like all the substance stuff, you have all of the adjustments here. Like they're all on the right. And so I think like once you start working with all of it, it all kind of, your mouse movements and all your behaviors start kind of acting the same. So you do start picking up a lot more once you're starting. And there you go, like erosion. Like let's say this is a rusty, like beat up car. Like you can change the size. That's actually another cool thing too, that is a cool detail, is that the erosion here is actually being added. It's being
to the
added,
cracks.
like right.
Yeah.
Which I believe physically makes sense. Like it would manifest there.
Right. Right.
But yeah,
Reverb Mike says, nice bowling ball. Don't forget the finger holes. That almost looked like a bowling.
Oh my bad. I was mostly just kind of demonstrating like this. Yeah, I do agree. Like Designer is a little more nitty gritty, and it's a little more nuanced, and it looks a little more scary. But
it's the same idea.
It's super powerful. But I do think Sampler, if you're just like literally getting started, I think the best things to do is to get into Sampler and start watching either that Louis tutorial, as well as like some of those Daniel Theiger, Javier Perez. Those are just absolutely incredible tutorials. Like it's insane what they make. So for now, let's go back to Stager. Let's export this, and let's say, okay, let's go to here and go to Stager. And actually, I want to make sure I'm selected on my table, and then, oh, cool. Okay, so then I have my wood that I imported here, but let's go to Designer and then export to Stager. Hopefully this works. Yup, it does work. Nice. So you can now see that like I now have that rock texture, and it might look a little weird because all of like light is so important in 3D, and you can see here actually that like there's a light being projected onto this texture, but right now I'm looking at the back of it where the light's not showing. So moral of the story is this doesn't look one-to-one yet, because the lighting in my scene here is not set up, which is, I will get into lighting more tomorrow. But that's why it's like a little more dark. It's not it's not 1-to-1, which is
It's not
fine.
ready. It's not ready. It's all right. We know it's
And
there.
so, and with rock, I totally want displacement. Like most rock is not like smooth. It's not, it's not perfect. But I think actually displacement is actually real. If you're going to talk about like PC specs and all that stuff for 3D, displacement is pretty heavy. Like it will slow things down. So you should dial it in when you're like ready to, but I think I'm going to keep it off for now. Like I don't want it on right now. And another thought too is like, if I want this to be maybe more of like a white rock, all I do is just go to this like gradient map and adjust it. Like, oh, sorry, I just deleted that. Like maybe I want this black value to be pushed up. So maybe I want it to be more gray. So I'm gonna do, I know a value of like 555, like a hex code for a different gray, and then I'll just, oh, actually I don't think I pressed enter, my bad. Oh no, I did. I think I did.
Yeah, I think you closed the window.
Either way, like you adjust it, and then when you adjust it, you just simply will export it and drag it back onto your scene. But I think for all right, we got like 15 more minutes. So I think let's chip away more at like the actual composition. I think that I'll work a little more on the composition tonight and a bit tomorrow. Because, like these are some like basic shapes here. Oh, and actually there, I just moved the group. I didn't want to move the group actually.
Yeah.
And you can, just like with Photoshop and Illustrator, you can lock your stuff. So let's say I'm done moving my table. Like I don't want to move my table anymore. So I'm gonna actually do the shortcut is Control L, and I have it locked. And let's go back to my camera view. And
there it goes.
Oh, wait, okay. Maybe you have to lock the group, I think is actually the thing here.
And you can always ungroup it, right? And then create its own layer for it.
But I think for purposes of just staying organized, like I want to keep it in a group. But but if that's the case, I need to make sure to keep it. I need to make sure like what I'm touching is or moving is like what I want to move. I don't want to, you have to stay organized in this circumstance. Alrighty, so I do like this idea here as well. And these folded shapes, I want to choose, I like this shape too. So let's turn this one off and let's ditch this one as well. So I'm just gonna like turn those and let's bring this one over. And let's bring this over, and then let's maybe bring this porcelain bowl over. Yeah, all right, let's say like someone was eating here. Like just kind of, I think like that's the thing too, is like with these basic shapes and stuff, like you're trying to maybe kind of tell a type of story, but the story might be up to others' interpretation. Like they don't know what happened, or like where is the person, etc., etc. Like, so all right, I moved the bowl here.
Thank you, Voodoo Val, for the update. We have 20 minutes or so left. Please let us know if you have any questions for Kyle, and because we got a lot to share. It's been a packed full of info today.
This little item is cool too. I think that this is like
it's a secret.
And like instead of a like a napkin in like America, I think they use this, like they use like a chopstick stand basically, so that like the tips of it are not touching like something dirty.
Like an ashtray.
Yeah, to some extent. So all right, I want this to be on the table. Let's okay. Actually, a cool thing to do with the chopsticks would be to do the collision stuff, right? Like maybe I want it to seem, or actually let's do it with like let's do it with the soup spoon. Let's make this a collision object, which is actually right up here. Although maybe I think you have to turn it on here. Okay, that's fine. And then I want it to look like it's
in the bowl.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I'm gonna move this, and then I'm gonna push it down. I need to, so now it's not working, right? But that's because I don't have the collision object turned on. I think another really important thing to do when you are considering getting into like 3D and stuff is at this point, I'm always on the Substance Discord. It is a huge help.
Okay.
Like there literally are the developers there that are like there to help you and assist you. You know, like let's say you're like, oh, this collision object's not working. Like they will be there for you. Like and like trying to solve it. Like I think with 3D, it's a lot of, it's like it's art. It's also technical, and so like when you kind of run into those technical problems, it can be a little frustrating when you're starting out. But that's where it comes into like, I literally think like those types of discords are like a live Stack Overflow of people to like assist you when you need help. So, all right, this Japanese bowl. I also, you know, let's maybe say like I just want to show off these assets. I think they're cool, and I didn't have to spend time modeling them. So let's like maybe just bring this one in, and maybe I want it to be like I want to show off the colliding a lot. Like the colliding feature in this app is super cool. So I maybe want this like bowl to collide with this one, but for now let's focus back on the spoon. Let's select this bowl. Let's make sure that this is a collision object. And then let's bring the spoon. And there you go. All right, cool. So now you can see that it's like interacting with it. It's kind of like a physics simulation. And if I like rotate it, let's like search, or excuse me, let's view the camera again, which actually I want the camera to be like, in terms of oh, I don't know if I can, I'm trying to drag it up. Maybe it's because it's in a group, but I want the camera to be like the top. Maybe if I select this, shift select, okay, whatever, it's not a big deal. Let's just go to camera view. And now you can see,
wow,
that's actually, that is a bad etiquette to do, is I was in camera view and I zoomed in, and I didn't want to change my view, if that makes sense. So actually I'm gonna go back and let's go, I'm just gonna save it because I've done a few adjustments, and let's go here, let's adjust it. I think I was more like there, or actually the focal point,
it was the background was lining up to that wall corner.
yeah. Right. So I think actually this should actually align perfectly if I do 136. Yeah, that's like about right. Okay, so we're back to where we are. I want to actually, I think to avoid that zooming in, right, there you go. Okay, that is a great practice. If I'm like, okay, I'm happy where my camera is, I don't want to, you know, my instinct was to zoom in because I like wanted to show that I have the spoon here. But I keep it locked because I am happy where my camera is, and I'm happy where this plane is. So let's keep arranging. Let's say like, okay, the table's in the center, just like this. And it looks like in these compositions, the seats, or like, which I have a seat modeled, the seats like on the right or on the left, I think I'm gonna, because he has it on the right in my composition, let's keep it on the left, which I already
Mm-hmm.
have. And move it. Let's like move it over here, and let's get out of camera view.
Are you Carol has a question. Could
Yeah.
you show how to align things using that center dot? And you're not necessarily aligning, are you? Is that something?
So that goes back to like the origin point thing that I was talking about, right? So like if I want to bring some more assets in, like I'll show an example. Like let's say let's do the teapot, the cup, and let's bring this here. You can actually see right here, if I focus in on the cup, the origin point is actually at the bottom. And but I actually, let's say I want it in the middle. You need, and I want it to like, let's say for some reason I want the cup to be like flipped over. I don't know why, but I just do. And I'm gonna actually bring the origin point in the center is most of the time what you want. And I actually think too, when you do that, just really the origin point's important, because like the way that I think designer detects where other, you know how like I was showing that when you drag a certain mesh, it'll like say, hey, you're like at the edge of this mesh, or hey, you're at like the face of this mesh. I believe that is detected by the origin point.
Okay, which is why it's called the origin point. It all starts right there.
Yeah. And so now you can see like when I rotate it, it's just gonna rotate from this center. So I hold shift and okay, something that I was kind of experimenting with in another stager scene was faking a fluid, like a spill. So all I would really do there is be like, okay, and actually I kind of like the idea of maybe having like some of this like kitchenware on the table, but like something happened, like maybe someone like scurried away from the table and like spilled everything. Like I don't know, you come up with like the concept.
You come up with the story based on what you see, and what you see is like something happened. Yeah.
Right. And to me too, that makes it not just like a thing you're like, oh hey, like that looks cool. Like you have more of a
like
concept.
An action.
So
yeah, it's like
if I want to
dynamic.
have that spill, I can go here and be like, okay, all right, I have the cup selected, go to the cup, and then you have these like I said too, right, if you were going to try to do in another 3D app, like literally try to simulate like the cup tilting and pouring over, that would be like, that would take some time. But with this, I'm gonna just take like this splash. Actually, I like this one, and I'm gonna just like drag it, and then I'm gonna just kind of, I'm gonna orient it like it looked like it was coming out of this cup. So like you maybe like smacked the cup, and now the water, which
that was good. That looks good. Oh my god.
Yeah. So like just take. Then you're like, oh well, okay. Is there like a liquid material? There is. There's in some of these things here, you have water.
Yes. Voodoo Val says someone knocked it over with mind powers. And I think Voodoo Val says it means the force. Somebody did it with the force.
Depending on like what shows you've been watching.
Yeah, right.
Like, so there you go. Like now you can see that like since water has like some translucency to it, you can now like see that with this material. I'm gonna actually do like one more thing. I'm gonna maybe choose like I want a porcelain material on the cup. I'm gonna probably change some of these materials. And yeah, like just keep adjusting this. I think I'm gonna just like keep choosing some more like shapes,
Mm-hmm.
um, and like make sure I'm like super happy with the composition. Uh, but yeah, now I would say one thing that I've done mostly to demonstrate designer and like some of the shading tools
Mm-hmm.
is like I would normally just try to do this whole all grayscale. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think it's better to do the shading after you've done the composition.
Yeah.
And so realistically, I think I would have focused like I kind of am throwing these on demonstrating like what these can do, but in a actual like production mentality, I think I would want to actually have the composition like if a client were to be like, "Hey, like I would send them the grayscale composition before I start doing the shading because the shading is a lot of like iteration and saying like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, am I happy with this color? Or am I happy with how reflective this is?" Like there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of
It's
I
a
think
little
it's a
distracting when you're looking at it too, because you start thinking in colors and stuff.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's
Uh-huh.
like in
Mm-hmm.
composition,
Yeah.
like even when you're doing drawings and stuff, like you should be
Mm-hmm.
thinking more of like the silhouettes and like
Yeah.
what's the contrast like
Mm-hmm.
so just kind of as like a disclaimer with that type of I think that is the better like mindset to be having with
Gotcha.
that.
Very cool. Clever says rips tablecloth out, magic trick fail. And so what I
Yeah.
get from here and what you were showing us from that Peter Tarka this, Peter Tarka is more like that's more of a still life
Yeah.
kind of composition, and what you're going for is more of a dynamic moment in time in a moment where something was happening.
Yeah.
Composition. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And he does have some interesting ones where like maybe like it looks like a ball is like rolling up on like a like kind of like a kind of like a skateboard ramp or something
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it is like a very interesting, and I do think that like when you're getting into 3D, like this is a great
Look at
like
that.
thing to just think of. Like stick with some like basic shapes, use some
Mm-hmm.
assets. Don't maybe get too into like modeling and stuff where like it's kind of maybe intimidating. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like I showed too, but like with designer, you could just make this model, which might seem complicated to some, just like within like a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like just keep adjusting, keep choosing some different assets. I want to keep adding some more like collision stuff, right? Like maybe I want the chopsticks to seem like they're also involved in the scene.
Mm-hmm.
Let's select these guys actually. Let's go here. Where is this? Okay, there's this triangle. Let's call this triangle. Oh, actually, and I want to keep that collision idea.
Right. Yeah, I
So
like that. That was cool. And
yeah,
Voodoo Val says that ramp is called a half pipe. The
right.
skateboard ramp. Yeah.
It's been a while. Yeah, okay, thank you. It's yeah, it's definitely a challenge to be like working, explaining, and talking and
Mm-hmm.
trying to like go through what words you can remember. So yeah, I'm gonna bring some more things over, like, and I think I'm just gonna do some just more like alignment. Maybe I think that it would be cool. I think I need something like he kind of has everything pretty close, but I think I need something to like balance it out on the right
Mm-hmm.
side.
Mm-hmm.
Nope, not designer. Sorry.
And I think and it looks like in Peter's compositions things are close together, and
Yeah, they're like
or
tight knit.
right, but it also but it could also be an illusion where once you look at it from a different angle you see that it's spread out,
Yeah,
so it's hard to tell. um
yeah, right. I totally agree.
mhm.
That's a very interesting takeaway.
While you're working on that, I'm gonna remind everybody that to make sure to remember that Adobe Live replays are available when we're offline. And we have replays on both YouTube and Behance. So please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the creative goodness. And tomorrow we'll be back for more 3D designs with Kyle Jamison. Today is only part 1. Tomorrow is part 2. Come back to see how Kyle will finish up the details by adding shading, lighting, cameras, and environments to finish off the scene. And you'll also want to see how Kyle finishes his project by creating a GIF in After Effects. We have a little over 5 minutes. So that's why I'm getting this in.
Yeah, so I mean, in the workflow generally is like do the brief, get the composition, do some of the shading. We'll get into lighting tomorrow. And then once you're happy with it and once you're going to render it, which I might just take a screenshot of it and do some compositing at the end, because I think I might have to render it at like a super low scale to actually have it like live. But I do like compositing, and compositing is basically like saying, let's go into a ray traced mode. So that's actually what it looks like ray traced, and you can see right now that actually it's denoising. So you can kind of already see some of the light. And actually, I think I still have that light in here somewhere. Let me just, I think actually what if I do Shift A? I wonder if there's a way to like, I did Control A, like to collapse all of the folders. I don't remember. I don't remember the shortcut for that in Photoshop or Illustrator, but I would assume it's probably similar. But you can see, right, like actually the water now is like picking. This is rendered view, so I'm gonna get out of it eventually. Like, I'm not gonna stay here, but you can see that like the water has like reflections
of that red background, huh? You can see a reflection. Yeah.
Yep.
Really cool.
Yeah, I might change the color of this red too, because now you kind of can't see the table, like because the table's also red and white. But I'll probably edit the designer file of the gradient a little bit more, but I do like the gradient on the chair. I think that is a cool look. I'm gonna just go back to some of my Adobe Stock, basically like designer files. Like they have it here for you, right? So I'm gonna go here and do like, let's actually drag. Let's drag like, let's do, I don't know. Let's do that ceiling thing on the wall. Let's maybe drag it onto here. Let's get out of ray traced mode, because that is just gonna slow things down.
2 minutes. 2 minutes, Kyle. Let's see.
Cool.
Let's see what you got.
Good to know. Okay, yeah. All right. Sorry, it was loading.
Okay.
So, all right, you have
there
like,
you
this
go.
wall.
And
then I think for the other wall, I might do like a this other really neat looking where are we? This laser cut wood. And then you drag it onto this plane. Oh, and it should populate. I think actually I had them all selected, which is why it just populated all of it. Oh, and I'm selecting the group. Okay,
there you go.
That is why that's happening. But yeah, so you go here, drag it, and
boom,
it should populate. And I think that this wood texture is really awesome.
Nice.
So
yeah, look at that.
Camera.
Wow.
Like, yeah, but
yeah,
I think
want to live in that room. Yeah, I want to live right there. That's a cool spot. Big ups to Voodoo Val for keeping the chat focused. Thank you very much. Stick around for our special pick of the past Premiere Pro Daily Creative Challenge. Join Sam Peterson on Twitch tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Pacific for a special Adobe Express stream. You can join him at twitch.tv/Sam Peterson Art. And we'll be back tomorrow with more 3D design with Kyle Jamison. Come back to see how Kyle will finish up the details by adding shading, lighting, cameras, and environments to finish off the scene. Thank you, Voodoo Val says stay tuned for the Daily Creator Challenge Encore coming up next. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow for day 2 of this session with Kyle and myself. I am DTM. Telling your name, Kyle, and we out of here.
Thank you.
All right. Enjoy your day, everybody.